Audio Unleashed.
Okay, I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make a podcast.
Let's talk about some audio stuff, man.
Let's do. We have a potpourri,
Ooh,
a plethora
ooh,
of
El guapo.
fascinating ideas for listeners of the Audio
Unleashed
podcast.
Yeah,
which
man.
you, not you, but you, the listener, are a listener of the Audio Unleashed podcast by definition at this point.
Absolutely.
I'm rambling, but that's what I was. That's what a dear friend of mine told me, was talking about podcasts, and she's like, she was talking about some podcast. It was in a meeting with a bunch of people, and she said, this one's not just like two idiots making jokes.
Ouch!
She must have listened to our podcast.
Yikes! I feel seen. I don't like feeling seen. Wow.
Yeah. So our first topic for intense intellectual and technical discussion is and idiotic comments is based on a YouTube video that you turned me on to by let's see, what's this guy's name? Julian Krause. He's got over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and he seems to know what he's talking about audio. So he has a video called "Jitter is Ruining Your Audio: The Truth About Jitter." And this is always scary for me because I'm just like, oh my God, is some dude going, oh, this thing is said to have lots of jitter, and therefore I listen to it and, oh, it's got jitter. So, it has, it doesn't have as much inner detail. So therefore jitter is bad. And this guy is I was delighted to find that this guy is the opposite of that. I have not seen his videos before, but I subscribed. I think he seems to have his head screwed on straight. And he does a deep dive into this, and we're going to talk about the results he got. And also, you then turned me on to an article in Audio Express, which is the super ultra technical audio journal that everybody should read, but it's kind of like print subscription only, and it's like $50 a year. So it's purely for the hardcore. And it is entitled "Audio Electronics, Is Digital Jitter Really a Problem?" And it is by Ethan Weiner, who is a longtime writer for Audio Express, as am I. And it's also, but I didn't read it. So I feel totally qualified to comment on it. But you read it, and so you can provide intelligent commentary about it. There's all this stuff in there about nanoseconds and noise floor, and I'm kind of like, oh, TLDR, man.
That's actually kind of what the article's about.
Oh, good. Okay, you can explain it to us.
Yeah, we'll get there.
I think we're going to talk about some other topics. What do we got next?
Yeah, so it's funny. We're trading stories this week. So this is an article that you turned me on to from Trusted Reviews. It's an article by Cobb Money. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, Cobb, I'm so sorry, but you got a really cool headshot, dude. Anyway, this is an article called "We've Got a Dolby Atmos Issue, and It's Not Going Away." And this is not the article that I thought it was going to be based on the headline. I'll give you the TLDR on this one, although you already know it. But basically, it's the problem that we have with Dolby Atmos is that, he's got a subhead here that explains it all. What is Atmos meant to be anymore? And I think that sums it up. And I think we're going to dig into that and talk about what Atmos is supposed to be and what it is and what the confusion's about, and give our thoughts.
Yeah. And, we're actually doing a side project, which I guess probably can't talk about, but we can talk about a little bit, maybe without naming names.
Okay.
That kind of has dug us a little deeper into this. And we'll also sort of, stoke the fire a little bit to create some excitement for this new project.
Ooh, drama.
So our third segment is going to be about acoustics. And this is, oh God, this subject has been kicking around for the whole time I've been involved in this industry. And I think there's no topic in audio that has been more strewn with just sheer speculation. And so I saw a LinkedIn post from Carlo Larazzo, who is the editor, owner, etc. of Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity, which has been kicking around for, oh my God, like at least 20 years, maybe 25, maybe longer. And so he was saying on Facebook, and some of the guys were chiming in, that he's talking about an article from Norm Varney, who's a respected writer, also somebody who writes for Audio Express. And you can't be too dumb if you write for Audio Express. Of course, I write for him, so that's a self-serving statement. But whatever. Anyway, so he's an acoustics consultant, and he clearly knows what he's talking about. And so he wrote a kind of lengthy article in there, and Carla was pointing to it. And a lot of people were saying, oh, acoustics is, you should spend 50% of the cost of your system on acoustics and blah, blah. And then I kind of did a deep dive into acoustics, and I found a nice video from our buddy John Darko at, well, let's just call it Darko Audio. You can find it. It's not hard to find. He's the Beyonce of the audio world. And I say that in a good way. Not
we'll link it in the show notes. We'll link both the article and the YouTube video. And it turns out, by the way, people are actually rating those, because I messed up in the last episode.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Sean Olive messaged me and he was like, hey, you screwed up a link. So sorry about that. But hey, I'm just excited to find out people are reading the show notes.
Yeah. So anyway, John Darko has a video. He has a home in Portugal and a home in Berlin, and he's talking about outfitting a second room in Portugal. Boy, is that a first world problem. First world of audio reviewers. We're about in the third or fourth world.
Yeah.
We don't even have a second room, much less like anybody who wants to help us furnish it. But anyway, so he shows how he had this super ultra echoey room, and he shows some of the process of doing the acoustical treatment for it. And it was a really interesting art, and it actually kind of dovetails with some of the points we're going to make. So we have our own, obviously we're putting this in there because we have some of our own ideas about acoustics, which we want to get past a lot of this sort of speculation and anecdotal stuff and look at how much actual scientific data is there on this subject, and what are the scientific facts. And
fourth, for our patrons, we're going to do something that I know Brent is chomping at the bit to talk about. This is a story from Billboard, although we could have just as easily picked a story from NPR or anybody else. The headline on Billboard is Grateful Dead breaks record for the most top 40 albums on the Billboard 200. So basically, spoiler warning, the Grateful Dead's latest archive release has pushed them ahead of. They were previously tied with Elvis and Frank Sinatra for the most top 40 albums, and they're now in the lead. So,
wow.
Much to the surprise of a lot of people, I think. I'm not standing in the rafters cheering this one, even though I am a Grateful Dead fan, and I, of course, own the album that broke the record for them. But I think this points to problems that we talked about in the last episode.
Did you push them over? Did you buying that push them over? I think it did.
Yes. Personally responsible for it. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So anyway, we'll get to that though. But first, what are we talking about first, man? We're talking about jitter.
We're talking about jitter. And this is a really great video.
Yeah.
He really digs in a lot. And he actually shows, he plays you examples of, rather than just saying, oh, jitter. Oh my God, jitter. Terrible. Yeah. Or saying jitter doesn't matter, he actually digs into it. He does his own experiments, and he actually plays you audio samples of things with extreme jitter. Unfortunately, he uses like a distorted guitar sound, which I don't think is the best choice for jitter. I think probably a solo piano might be better. But because there's so much distortion, there's so many harmonics flowing around in distorted guitar that if you add extra, extraneous harmonics with jitter, then or whatever artifacts with jitter, you might not notice as much, but you do notice it. I mean, he does get the jitter up high enough to where you can hear it. Anybody can hear it. And even the distorted guitar sounds like, oh, wow, geez.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a big difference.
Because it's not the kind of distortion that we are used to from, an amp head being overdriven or, being pushed into clipping or what have you. I mean, it is a unique Well, yeah, a unique form of distortion. I think that's safe to say. But the reason that I linked it, the reason that I liked it, the reason I thought it was worth talking about is so often we run into the problem in the domain that we operate in, writing about audio, that it's very, very hard to convey very specifically what these problems sound like. And I think that is part of the reason that we have mamby-pamby crap like inner detail and, chocolatey mid-range and all of that, just because it's not always easy to describe exactly in words precisely what you're hearing. So much as I hate to admit that I'm increasingly irrelevant, the beauty of a video like this is it's not talking in general terms. He's not hanging descriptors or vocabulary terms on something and hoping you get it. He is going, you want to hear what jitter sounds like? Here's what jitter sounds like. Here's what it sounds like at this level. Here's what it sounds like at this level. And I know it was really, really cool and informative in a way that you couldn't do in print alone.
And so what is his conclusion?
I mean, his conclusion is that basically jitter is not a problem you should be worried about because, yes, it exists in audio, but most cases with any competent sound system, it's below the threshold of audibility. It is a point that you and I hammer on time and time again, signal to noise. Yeah. Yes, you can measure this jitter. Yes, it is at, whatever percent. But if it is being masked by the signal to the point to where you can't hear it, why are we worried about it? And frankly, most $30 DACs these days have got jitter levels that are inaudible. Although interestingly, one thing that the Audio Express article that I also brought up is that the one exception to that might be HDMI connections in cheap AV receivers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was talking about one possible exception is jitter in the audio stream of an HDMI connection. In February 2009, okay, that was a while ago, but whatever, probably still true. British magazine Hi-Fi News published jitter measurements for 4 popular receivers. All but one had substantially more jitter in their HDMI outputs compared to their SPDIF outputs. I guess that would be inputs the AV receiver worried about. Yeah. So one was as high as 7.9 nanoseconds through the HDMI output compared to only 183 picoseconds through the SPDIF. So yeah, but I mean, I still don't know if am I worried about 6 or 7.6 nanoseconds of jitter? Looking at the graphs, probably not, to be honest.
I have another question though. Okay. So USB and HDMI are packetized data. It's not a data stream. It's a whole bunch of data that's in what they call a packet. And they send separate, packets of, I'm not a networking expert, but they send a whole lot of separate packets. And it's more like, you can sort of liken it to a recipe, right? Where you provide the ingredients, you provide the instructions on how to do it. And it's not like a SPDIF stream, right? It's just raw digital audio. There's no instructions. There's no nothing. You send it into the DAC and it converts it to analog, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with USB, HDMI, etc., all the audio chunks are in packets. They can be, if there's a transmission problem, they can retransmit them. Okay.
Yep.
And then it's reassembled within the sync device, the device that you're actually playing the sound through. And the jitter in that case doesn't really matter because it's all broken up into packets. And again, it's more like a recipe. And,
but even if it did, he's not saying there's consequential jitter. He's just saying that's an example of there actually being much higher measurable jitter in, a modern piece of electronics gear. But so he said one of the receivers had jitter as high as 7.6 nanoseconds. But in the paragraph he said in various audibility tests, people were unable to detect jitter unless it was greater than 30 nanoseconds. So it's academic, even if these HDMI connections have really, really, really unacceptably high jitter by the standards of the audio industry. It's still below the audible threshold, right?
But the problem that you run into, Dennis, is that you're completely, the argument, I shouldn't say the problem, the argument you're going to run into is the problem is that you have to deal with this argument. The argument itself is, well, who's to say what's audible?
People who did the tests,
Oh, right. I mean, exactly. But there's so many audiophiles out there who have that attitude. It's like, well, who's to say what's audible? And that attitude is fomented by, stereophile absolute sound, et cetera, where there's this idea that everything is audible. And any problem, you can't say it's not audible.
I think the problem is the message that they're sending is, but only if you had been included in this listing panel, then you would have been the one that could have heard it, right? The problem with the listing test is those weren't stereophile readers. If it had been stereophile readers, we would have blown this test out of the water, So.
Yeah.
By the way, Ethan also has some files at the end of his article showing different levels of jitter. So we've got 2 videos we'll be able to link here. So the most important thing, the thing that I really, really want people to take away is go listen to what jitter at audible thresholds actually sounds like, because I think most people who think they know what jitter does to an audio signal, based on all of the reading that they've done in hi-fi magazines, will be shocked to hear what jitter actually sounds like. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Did we define what jitter is?
Oh, God, I don't think we did.
Should we define what jitter is?
Yeah, go ahead.
As responsible journalists. Oh, I knew you were going to leave it to me. All right. So
do you want me to do it?
All right, no, I'll do it. With the digital signal, it's all ones and zeros, right? But they have to be clocked correctly, right? In other words, receiving...
Let's just say if CD audio had been sampled at 44.1, right? Then you would want... Right, 44.1 kilohertz. Then you would want exactly 44,100 times a second evenly spaced for those samples to be read, right?
Right.
And jitter is one is read nanoseconds or picoseconds earlier or later than it should be. Basically it.
So, however, digital systems there's this idea out there that was spread decades ago that digital systems, have to, have no room for error. And in fact, they all are engineered so that they have plenty of room for error. And so the fact that, the digital clock is a hair off, and it's only going to be a hair, because doing a 44.1 kilohertz clock is not exactly difficult. Or any other audio frequency, right? I mean, doing that accurately is not a problem, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous or whatever. And, so much, I mean, most of the digital audio we listen to these days, let's face it, is not SPDIF, right? I mean, most of the digital audio we listen to these days is coming through USB or possibly HDMI or a wireless connection.
Network,
right?
Yeah.
Or an Ethernet connection or whatever. Right. So it's all packetized, and then it's all buffered and reassembled. Okay. So it's held in memory and reassembled, unless there is a colossal problem in transmission. And again, all these packetized systems have really robust data correction to prevent that. That's just the reality of it. I think that if any audio manufacturers are still harping on this jitter thing, which some of them are, obviously, because some of them make these like femtosecond clocks and all these kind of things and blah, blah. And, so some of them are still, and, you can still go buy these jitter reduction doohickeys for like USB, which is ridiculous. That supposedly reduce the jitter on that line, which supposedly improves the sound quality. Again, show me the blind tests. And I'll believe it, but you will not show me the blind test. I don't mean you, Dennis. I mean you, manufacturers who sell these things are not going to show me the blind listening test that proves the audibility of it. So, I mean, it's just concerns about jitter. Both of these guys did a great job of proving that this is not a concern, except in the most extreme cases. And maybe
Can
even
I monologue for just a second here?
Go ahead. Sure. I've been.
A lot of people, I think, that get frustrated with us, me and you, I think they take the stance of like, why do you care then? Why do you care if I am super, super concerned about jitter? Like, what? Just leave me alone. Let me enjoy it. Let me explain why we care. Or no, I'm not going to speak for you. I'm going to explain why I care.
Okay.
The reason is, look, our hobby is not growing. Right, we're not developing new audio files at anywhere near a replacement rate. Right. And, a lot of it is just a matter of, well, whatever. I can get good sound with my earphones or changing lifestyles or what have you. And I'm not saying this is the main reason, but I'm saying it is a reason that I frequently hear people bring up for why they're not buying better hi-fi sound systems, is because they've been subjected to this messaging that it's something that you and I've said before. If it's not perfect, it's garbage, right?
Yeah.
And they're just like, God, it's just, I don't have the time or the money to put into getting good sound. And that breaks my heart, because as you and I have often said, these days it's easier than ever to get a great freaking sound system for less money than you think you have to spend. You could build an amazing sound system for $1,000 that will probably blow your mind, right?
Yeah.
But these people who are super concerned with jitter and other things like that are convincing the uninitiated that this is so difficult that you might as well not bother. And that's why I care. That's why I'm harping on issues like this, because I actually think this stuff matters. I think having a good high fidelity sound source in the home, I legitimately think it makes your life better. I do. And
I do too.
And anything, and I get frustrated with the gurus and the hardcore audiophiles chasing people away. Like, nope, this is our club. And if you're not willing to dedicate your entire life to it, then it's not worth your time. And that frustrates me.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not down with that. I agree. I think you're right. I think that maybe there was a time when this was important, but that time was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
When,
right.
That was before we had audio systems that use packetized data. Giant change there. And it was back when, DACs were pretty primitive. And I should point out, both of these guys, if I'm not mistaken, basically said that, the level of jitter that is troublesome is not found in any current DACs.
Right. And, again, like $30 DACs have jitter low enough to where you almost certainly can't hear it.
Yeah. But, this is, I feel like this is still going to keep going, because there's companies that make these products and they advertise in publications, and they preach to audio writers who don't understand digital audio and who don't understand any of this stuff, and keep buying into all these kind of products that supposedly reduce your jitter and supposedly make this giant transformation. They have no control testing. And so this is going to continue.
Yeah.
But,
all right, buddy, let's take a break.
We have spoken. We have made our little, now that the audio
unleashed
podcast has spoken.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll start to see some changes.
Maybe we will.
Yeah.
All right, buddy, you want to take a break, get some water, and come back and talk about Dolby Atmos?
Yes, more Atmos, but different than last time.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back. And welcome back to Audio
Unleashed.
I'm Dennis.
And I'm Brent.
Wait, are you imitating me? Are you like, I'm confused right now.
We got a hot topic for y'all today. It's about Dolby Atmos.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a piece in Trusted Reviews, as I said, by Cobb Monty. And the headline is, "We've got a Dolby Atmos issue and it's not going away." So the premise of this article, basically he starts off by talking about sort of his first exposure to Dolby Atmos when he went to the Dolby HQ in Soho and listened to,
Soho,
I think
London.
it was Soho, London. Yes.
Yeah, he doesn't say that because he's writing for a UK publication, so he doesn't need to tell you London. He's assuming you are expecting London, but this is a UK publication. So Soho, London. I've been there.
Right.
To the Dolby place.
So anyway,
because I worked for him. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's talking about, his first exposure to Atmos and, how it was developed as a cinema sound technology, and sort of talks about the evolution of it becoming a home technology, with AV receivers. And then things start to fall apart a little bit when let me just read this, because I think this is the paragraph that really sets up the problem. It's reached the point where I'm not even sure what Atmos is meant to be. It's grown from being a cinema technology to one that is somewhat uncomfortably fitted into living rooms and can be found in smartphones, wireless speakers, headphones, soundbars, and TVs. But it's never quite recaptured the thrill of immersive audio. That line in particular was interesting to me because if Atmos isn't immersive audio, then what is it, right? But I think he makes a good point.
That's the question.
What is Atmos in a TV? What does that even mean, right? What is it even supposed to mean? What is this supposed to sound like, having Atmos from two little bottom firing or backfiring speakers that are the size of like half a Bic pen, Yeah. You're the one that brought this to the table. What's the salient point here for you? What's your takeaway?
Okay, so I completely I could have almost written this, except my spelling of some words would have been different because I'm American.
Fewer use, yeah.
Yes, but he's So I was at the premiere of the press premiere of Dolby Atmos that Dolby did, and in L.A. And it knocked everybody's socks off. And this is after basically. SRS, which was bought by DTS.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I say
Isn't
DTS, I want to start laughing. What's that?
Yeah. Isn't everything these days?
Yeah. What? Bought by DTS?
Bought by DTS, yes.
Some things. But anyway, so SRS was promoting, okay, so let's say Atmos is basically a 7.1 channel bed, which is what we had before Atmos, right? More or less. Because there was a 7.1 version of Dolby Digital. Right. So Atmos is basically that, plus you can do objects, and the objects can be anywhere, right? And you can move them from one place to another in the sound field, and you specify how to do that within the software, right? So the idea is you can do them overhead. You can actually technically do them from the ground if you want to. Yeah. No, but I don't think anybody does, because there's no speakers under the ground. But whatever.
Right.
So it basically specifies the vectors of where the sound is supposed to come from. So you can do a 7.1 bed and add objects to it. You could do it all objects, but the SRS thing was all objects, and I think it was a little bit too much of a struggle for the production world to figure out what that meant. Whereas with Dolby said, well, hey, you can take the same thing you're doing and you can add more stuff to it. And people are like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Dolby won that battle.
Let's explain a little bit. Let's explain a little bit with it. So let's say you have an AV receiver and you've got a, people know what 7.1 means. That means, 7 speakers around. You've got front, left, and right, center. You've got surround, left and right. You've got rear, left, and right. And then you add the 0.1. That is the subwoofer. So Dolby Atmos would be like 7.1.4. And the 0.4 would mean 4 overhead speakers, 2 speakers in the ceiling or bouncing off the ceiling or high up on the wall above you, and 2 behind you. You can also do 2 straight over you too. So have like 7.1.6. But those speakers, if they're doing it right and they're using objects, sometimes people just mix them like their channels, right? But if they're doing them right and they're objects, then what happens is, say you've got a helicopter going from the front left of the sound field to the rear right. They will just take that object and move it through 3-dimensional space. And then your receiver goes, oh, to recreate that, then I need to put it in this speaker and this speaker, and then move it to sort of an area between this speaker and this. So it determines, based on what speakers you actually have set up, how does it need to use those speakers to recreate the position of this Atmos, this helicopter sound, or this bullet sound, or whatever it is. So I think a lot of people could probably make sense of it if they're video gamers, because video gamers are used to object-based audio because you're moving around in the world. So if you spin your character, well, the location of an, something that's making noise is going to rotate around you. This is sort of similar, but you generally your bed's not moving, but the objects are basically calculated in real time all the time.
Right.
So,
I was going to say, I went to that Dolby demo and it blew everybody away, and it's kind of been downhill from there. And I kind of shouldn't say that, but because if you do a Dolby Atmos home theater and you have 2 or 4 ceiling speakers that are actually in the ceiling or on the ceiling, not speakers that supposedly bounce up off the ceiling, you will get something like what we heard in those great Dolby demos. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, the vast, I would guess that probably of the people listening to Atmos, that's fewer than 1% have that kind of setup. Usually you're going to be listening to, God, every soundbar is Atmos certified now. And that even means that could be a 2.1 soundbar with 2 little speakers and a sound, in the bar and then a subwoofer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're using a virtualizer, which, sort of takes a stereo signal and fakes surround sound effects to do that. Or in headphones, you only have 2 drivers there. You have left and right. And then they use a virtualizer to fake the surround sound effect. And that's what, if you listen to Dolby Atmos in Apple Music and listen through headphones, that is what you're hearing.
Yeah.
You're not hearing that incredible sound that you can get with actual overhead speakers. And I'll just say, this guy's making a great point that Dolby, I don't know how much quality control there is in the Dolby Atmos licensing at this point. I would guess possibly none, or possibly it's done. I know way back when I left 20-something years ago, they were already starting to move towards manufacturers certifying their own stuff and Dolby not testing it because they had to maintain a staff of audio engineers to test the stuff. It was a lot of people. There's a whole big giant room at Dolby San Francisco. So they seem to be slapping the Atmos logo on anything that'll pass an audio signal these days. And that's what this guy is lamenting. And I completely agree with him. To say I'm underwhelmed with Atmos as a headphone presentation thing, which has got to be at least half of what people are listening to these days, is an understatement. So the project that I alluded to before is I don't want to go into depth because it involves working with a company, but you and I were working on some test tracks with Atmos to see what it can do in headphones. And, where we had like specific channel locations and things like that.
Yeah. And
I tested it with several people and the results were all over the map in terms of what people perceived. As far if you said, okay, this is coming from 45 degrees to the left, 45 degrees off the center axis. And people might think it was 15 degrees or people might think it was 60 degrees or whatever. And then we had sounds coming from behind you and above you and all that kind of thing. And, and many different sets of headphones were tried.
That was the biggest, that was the thing that shocked me is like when I was going through it, like I would listen to my AKGs and, there was a test track that was supposed to be rear surround. Well, it might be kind of in my head, but huge, or it might be in front of my face, or it might be ever so slightly behind me. Then I put on my Beats Fit Pro, and it's kind of like, well, this is better with the front, but there's like nothing like what was supposed to be 90 degrees left and right was maybe 60 degrees left and right, where you were like, that should be the easiest thing to do. And I'm like, I can't. And it was so radically different from headphone to headphone, man.
This squares with my experience is that when and that was actually, we actually encoded in Atmos. I actually got Atmos stuff for Reaper, the digital audio workstation we use. And so we know exactly what was supposed to happen. And boy, in so many cases, it didn't happen. And so this is why, I've kind of gotten off of Atmos for headphone listening is because instead of this sort of direct 2-channel sound piping straight into your ears sound that we've been used to for decades. Some of us, sadly. It's a sort of almost sort of swirly, like sort of thing where it's just sort of semi-enveloping. And maybe I'm just an old guy, but it seems unfamiliar to me. And since okay, let's point out that they're using what I call a one-size-fits-all headphone virtualizer, where they take an average human head-related transfer function, which is how your brain translates what your ears hear into directions, right? Like, oh, gee, it's louder in the right side, therefore it's coming more from the right side. And it's also delayed coming into my left ear, so that means it's coming from the right. Things like that. And so they approximate an average human HRTF. However, human HRTFs vary a lot. And there have been companies, there's the Smith Realizer, which, where it puts little microphones inside your ears and, runs a bunch of test tones and things. And then it processes and it figures out what your individual HRTF is. And it can very precisely simulate. I mean, you can get, it sounds, I've heard it. I couldn't tell the difference between a full JBL high-end surround sound system that costs probably $200,000 versus the headphones. Okay. I think they were like, I can't remember. There were some open back hi-fi man or something headphones. And it was shocking what you can actually accomplish with a virtualizer, but you have to know the person's HRTF. Yeah. But with this Dolby, and I guess Apple's involved in this too, but this Dolby, let's call it the Dolby / Apple one-size-fits-all virtualizer, it's only going to be, I mean, it may work perfect for somebody, but not anybody I've met yet.
You've heard of the Flaw of Averages, right?
No.
I'm going to get the details of this all wrong because this is based on like something I read like decades ago or whatever. But anyway, so in the early 50s, late 40s or early 50s or something like that, the Air Force was having a problem where they're just having an inordinate amount of crashes, right? And they had really good pilots, but for whatever reason, they couldn't like really the planes just weren't working for them. And somebody figured out that the problem was they were basing the cockpits on the average body dimensions of their pilots, right? And at the time, they had a pretty small range of body types. Like there were height limitations and all of this and weight limitations, and yet still building the cockpits to the average body dimensions of the pilots that they had meant that the cockpit didn't work for anybody. It's sort of a similar thing here, man.
It is. I want to say, I think that Atmos, obviously we've already said with an AV receiver and overhead speakers, it works amazingly well, I think. And with, I think also with sound bars, if the sound bar has upward firing drivers, or if it's like the Polk Magnified Mini where it's a little driver array in a small sound bar, but they do a lot of processing and a lot of beam forming where they take, two drivers and use the interference and reinforcement patterns, between those drivers to make a beam that points the sound in different places, right? You can get a big, giant, humongous wraparound sound with any of the better Dolby Atmos sound bars. And I don't mean the little $200 ones that are just a 2.1 sound bar or something like that, where they just slapped an Atmos logo on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the ones that are, 500 and up, I really think that Atmos made a big improvement. I'm not sure if it's because of the Atmos or just because of it inspired the soundbar manufacturers to really try to do better and try to make their stuff sound more enveloping. But I think it made a giant improvement in soundbars. Soundbars are much better now than they were 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
But with headphones, I got to tell you, it's not working for me. I don't listen to Atmos with headphones unless I need to. And
Can I ask you for some sort of insider baseball speculation here?
Sure.
And there's something that's occurring to me, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm off base. You tell me. But it seems to me in recent years that Dolby is on a mission to simplify its branding. And the reason I say that is because for years we had ProLogic, and then we had ProLogic 2X, and then, we had ProLogic 2Z, and right, every iteration of ProLogic 2 whatever that came out sort of let you know what it would do. Like ProLogic 2Z would take stereo and sort of upmix it to an immersive audio thing. And then one year I remember I got in the latest AV receiver from Sound United, whatever. And it was like, I'm looking at the specifications, and all of a sudden it doesn't have Dolby ProLogic 2 whatever anymore. It has Dolby Surround, right? And now going forward, every development that they make to Dolby, they're sort of, taking 2 channels and expanding it to much bigger, no matter what it does, no matter what new features they add. It's just Dolby Surround these days. So I thought it was like a mistake, because I'm like, dang, man, Dolby, they've gone back to the 80s here. But no, it's just that's what they call it now. And I'm wondering if it's just, and they used to have Dolby Headphone, but they don't call their headphone implementation Dolby Headphone anymore. They just call it Dolby Atmos. And they don't even call it Dolby Atmos for headphones. They just Dolby Atmos. Everything is Dolby Atmos. Yeah. And I wonder if it is a misguided quest to simplify the language to maybe not be daunting for people. Do you think that tracks with what you know of Dolby?
I think, honestly, it's more, yes. I think that is a strong drive there. However, I also think that it's sort of a brand extension of like, okay, well, Atmos is this immersive thing. And if you go in the movie theater where they have overhead speakers, presumably, you will hear this and you'll go watch, Batman versus the Green Lantern or whatever. And, you'll hear sound coming from overhead and you'll be like, wow, this is great. And, the idea, so you like immersive sound, and then you get the idea, and, even you get a good Dolby Atmos soundbar. It's like, wow, this sounds great. But then when you transfer it to the headphones, you're like, well, it's still Dolby Atmos. So it's something like that. And I think, I don't think there was, when Apple made its big push with Dolby Atmos, which it's still pushing, they're now saying that you can, they will pay you more royalties on Apple Music if your entire catalog is in Atmos.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're still pushing this. This was not a flash in the pan, throw it at the wall and see what sticks thing. But, everybody I know who heard it when they really made their big push was just kind of like, And, sometimes it sounds good, with headphones. Sometimes it sounds good. Sometimes it actually sounds kind of better. Sometimes it doesn't. And then, of course, that reaction is going to be different with every different person. And it's also going to vary to some extent with the kind of headphones or earphones you're using.
And that could dilute the Atmos brand, too. That could make somebody go, oh, well, I heard Dolby Atmos on my AirPods Pro, so I'm not going to pay for the movie ticket that's charging extra for Atmos because I heard it. And it's like, it doesn't sound any good. So it's like same as stereo, Yeah.
I wonder if they're having this discussion at Dolby headquarters, which I have not even been in. And they've had that headquarters for at least 10 years now. I've heard it's very fancy. But so I'm not connected with, I left Dolby in 2002. And nowadays, I'm sure if I walked into the building, I'd meet somebody I know, but I'm not sure who that would be.
Yeah.
So. But yeah,
they need to be careful. There's a concept in the philosophy of science, or a saying in the philosophy of science, that a theory that explains everything explains nothing. It's often attributed to Karl Popper, but Dolby is running into the danger of making that happen with Atmos. If Atmos is everything, then it's not really anything.
They've already made it happen. That's the point this guy makes in this column.
Yeah,
that's basically sort of narrowing down the point he makes. It's like, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah,
smartphones can apparently do Atmos, but I'm not even sure what that means anymore because there's no way they can produce an immersive experience through their speakers.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point he's making. Is like, what does Atmos mean anymore? It doesn't really mean much of anything.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's wrap that up.
Yeah, man. Let's take a break, and we'll be back in a minute.
Cool. And we're back. This is Audio
Unleashed.
And for our third segment, we are going to talk about the subject of acoustics. And this has been talked about just so much over the last at least 30 years. And I feel like we've made no progress at all, at least in terms of the quality of the general discussion of it. And that's why I wanted to bring it up again. Yeah. I saw a LinkedIn post from our buddy Carlo LaRosso, who is the owner and editor of HomeTheaterHiFi.com, which is better known as Secrets of Home Theater and Hi-Fi. Site that's been around forever. And he is he's promoting an article that Norm Varney did, which is called Determining Room Acoustics is a 6-Step Process, but which is a really, really, really long and in-depth article, which we should discuss a little bit. But Carlos is saying basically that the room is the most important part of your audio system, and then the speakers, and then all this other stuff. And a lot of other people are pointing out, like, oh yeah, I tell people, they should spend 50% of their budget on acoustics and blah blah. And so I also am a big fan of the Darko Audio YouTube channel and website, and so I just know I kind of went over there for my weekly look to see what he's up to, and he also has an article on acoustics. And so I kind of wanted to open this discussion because I have a unique experience with acoustics. I'm a very lucky man. Our old pal, Dr. Floyd Toole, best known, arguably, certainly one of the 2 or 3 best known audio researchers of all time, wrote a book. This should not be news to anybody who listens to this podcast. He wrote a book called Sound Reproduction, The Acoustics and Psychoacoustics of Loudspeakers in Rooms. And he actually dealt with this. I did an article so long ago now for Sound and Vision magazine, when I was writing for Sound and Vision. That was probably at least 10 years ago, maybe longer. And so I read Floyd's stuff about acoustics in his book. And so at the time I lived near, like about 10 miles away from Floyd. And I've known him. I've been to his house and stuff like that. And so I had a couple questions. I just called him up, and he's like, wait a minute, you read the book? Yeah, it's awesome. He says, well, that's a refreshing change of pace. And he said, look, how about you live close by. How about if I just come over to your house and we'll talk? I'll see what your room looks like, and we'll talk. And he came over, and I said, all right, great. I'll buy you lunch. Great. He comes over, and and look, this is a guy who's done like so much research, as well as recording studio consulting and all sorts of things like that. Designing recording studio control rooms and this and that. And so, or more, I should say, more fixing problems in recording studio control rooms that other people had designed. And, he came in, he looked around my room. He's like, yeah, do this, 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 and this. And that was his analysis. And he was absolutely right. So I feel like there's a lot of valid stuff out there, a lot of valid statements about room acoustics. However, I think it's a lot simpler than a lot of people make it out to be. And I wanted to feel free to jump in here. I feel like I'm dominating this discussion.
I'm enjoying listening, but
okay, well,
keep going.
Well, I'll regale you with some more fantastic tales of acoustics. So anyway, so in Floyd's book, as you would expect, he actually has research to point to. And the best piece of research he has to point to is they did a comparison of, they tested some speakers in 3 acoustically different rooms. Although I will say all 3 rooms had a relatively similar and, safe and sane reverberation time, which is called RT60. It's reverberation time 60. It's the amount of time it takes for a sound at a certain frequency to die out by 60 decibels, right? So in an anechoic chamber, it's going to be no time. In a giant church, it's going to be, a few seconds. So typically in a home, you want somewhere around a half a second, at I think 1 kilohertz or whatever. And so they did 3 different acoustically different rooms with similar reverberation times. And they found that, the ratings of the speakers were the same in all 3 rooms, basically. There was very little variation in the ratings of the different speakers, which shows that a good speaker will work just fine in a wide variety of rooms, right?
Yeah.
But then they also did a test where they did binaural recordings of those speakers playing in those rooms. And in this case, the room turned out to be the most important thing because your ears adjust to different acoustical environments, okay?
Yeah.
And in this case, when you had the headphones on listening to the binaural recordings and you could switch quickly from room to room, the differences were obvious. Whereas if you move from one room into the next, your ears adjust I guess pretty much instantaneously.
Right.
But this sort of dovetails into the Darko video, the John Darko video, which I really liked a lot. So John, famous audio, I guess you call him an audio video vlogger or whatever. He's got a YouTube channel that's very successful. He's got a great website. And I'm on there all the time just because he's very entertaining and he's really got his finger on the pulse of what's going on in audio. And so he did an article about acoustics and the way his attitude or his angle was that, he had gotten this, he lives half-time in Portugal and half-time in Berlin. And his place in Portugal is very reflective. He's already done one article about the acoustics of it, but he wanted to start another listening room up in his, I guess, what's the attic or certainly the second floor of this building. And it was very reflective. And he's got a thing in there where he claps his hands and you can just hear it just echoes like it's a church or something, right? Because there's no absorptive surfaces in there. And then he kind of goes into okay, we brought in all this acoustic stuff, which is a well-known brand of acoustic treatment. And they did all this stuff and then he claps his hands and it sounds, a lot deader, a lot more controlled. And I wanted to say that was a good demonstration of where acoustics really matters is if your room's really bad. I mean, if you're in an echoey environment, right? And if I'm talking to you in a big giant church and you're 10 feet, 12 feet, 15 feet from me, right? I'm probably going to have a hard time understanding you. And my brain will not adjust to that.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And you're going to have, if it's a smaller, really reflective room, you're going to have flutter echo where the sounds bounce back and forth between the 2 walls. It goes, and it's especially annoying if you're clinking metal things together. You just hear it bounce back and forth. And I've heard some sound recordings where in a really live room, without any acoustic treatment and maybe without a carpet, the sound from the surrounds starts to bounce back and forth, and it really gets confused, especially with music recordings, which have a lot more discrete stuff back in the surround channels. And I think you look at a room like John had, and you're like, okay, you have to treat that with you have to do something, and you probably have to think about it. Okay, I mean, but just putting a nice thick rug down would help immensely.
Hey man, every time our friend Sandy Gross moves to a new place, the first picture that I get from him in a text message is just a very nearly completely empty room with a gigantic Persian rug and 2 speakers. That's the first thing he moves in is a big ass carpet. So it could do a world of good.
Step 1, that gets rid of a lot of the liveliness of the room. And then you can look at, you should go read Norm's article because it is a really, really, really long article. And he's saying it's a 6-step process, which, and he admits at the end of the article, very few people are actually going to go through all of this. If you got a lot of money to throw around, you can do that.
Yeah.
He's got probably 150,000 worth of speakers here alone, plus a lot of big amps. And this is not just a photo. This is a photo of somebody doing some measurements.
Right.
So this is, I assume, something he actually had from a room he worked on. So he's talking about big dollar installations here. And, he's showing, his first photo shows not only his test gear, but a bunch of aluminum studs which implies construction. So this is a different level. So that's fine. So I don't want to criticize I don't criticize anything he's saying in here at all. But you don't have to do it. It's not like your room sucks if you don't do this. If you do, if you follow, Floyd Toole's prescriptions, which maybe my article about this in Sound and Vision is still up. Who knows? I mean, how many times have they sold that thing since I worked there? But that's true of any publication I've ever worked for, pretty much. But we might be able to find that article, and it actually had some really no nonsense, common sense advice that's all based on actual listening tests, blind listening tests. And what I get tired of, the whole point of this whole discussion, which I wanted to make, was I'm just tired of guys going like, oh, I think, acoustics is X amount of importance. Well, based on what? What was your testing regimen that you used to come to that conclusion? And I want to see a regimen. I don't not want to see like, oh, I listened to my room and I changed out some panels and I think that blah, blah,
Yeah.
Of course, there's those. It's hard to do blind listening tests of acoustic treatment. I don't remember if I've ever actually attempted that. You could. You'd have to blindfold the people, and I've done that before. But
kinky.
I just think I want to see more a real extension of what is in Floyd Toole's book with acoustics, where people are doing more testing. I just don't know. That would fall to the YouTube guys, because that's, all right, look, I'm just going to say, that's where the real ambition in audio coverage lies now. Those are the guys that are taking on interesting projects, like the Jim Lill stuff that we talked about a few episodes ago, where he's talking about, he's doing these huge projects to talk about where does the sound come from in a microphone. And, a YouTube guy could take on this, but the established publications are not going to do it because they're too busy worrying about making money.
Yeah.
And how many advertisers are they going to get out of this effort? Not many. How many readers are they going to get? Probably not many, but it'd be a damn good thing to do for somebody. But we are not a publication. We are Audio
Unleashed,
which is a podcast done by two guys that don't actually make any money at it. So,
hey, at least we're not losing money at it.
No, thanks to our wonderful Patreon subscribers who will get our extra segment about the Grateful Dead coming up. But that's a sign that we need to wrap this thing up.
It is indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do some credits, buddy.
So what are we going to dredge up for music this week?
Oh man. Well, I am editing and mixing and mastering this one. So I think I don't have time to do any new music, buddy. I'm sorry. My life is just like a flaming dumpster fire right now. So I'm going to pull up a few of my favorite Brent Butterworth or maybe Butterburger house band tracks, and we'll have those, and we'll try to get some new music maybe next time. So
I should have recorded my jam session last night.
Ooh,
there would have just been a lot of cacophony. Well, jazz jam sessions are quite often cacophony because it's the drummer and the bass player are not using their own instruments, and the guitar players' levels are either too loud or way too soft, and then there's horn players.
Oh God, I didn't think about horn players, man.
What's that going to amount to? Who knows?
Yeah. Oh man, you've just explained something about the Grateful Dead to me, man.
What's that?
Well, it's just like the shows where Branford was in the Grateful Dead were always just the most chaotic and not in a good way. Like I've never heard a good show when Branford was in the band, man. It was just, and they were a jam band. They got on stage and they were like, hey, let's practice, for however many thousands of people. So yeah, it never quite worked when they had a horn player. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I'm nothing against horn players.
Yeah.
Not that I don't have my reservations about horn players, but just I'm always cautious. But anyway, so you're editing this one, right? Tell me you're editing this one.
I am editing this one.
And it's a Butterburger production.
It is. Anything else we need to credit? Yeah, before we move on.
There's somebody we need to throw some love to.
Let's again mention Jeff's new book, and you're the one who can remember the title of it, so you pitch it.
Jeff Morrison. It's called Budget Travel for Dummies. It's an actual certified dummies book.
I'm Jeff. I'm so sorry, buddy. I just can't ever remember the name of your book, and I've actually read about a quarter of it now. So I don't know why, but the name just eludes me. Anyway,
okay,
cool.
Go pick it up. I've actually only read like the first little bit because I've been busy with my musical projects, but I'm
really
looking
good.
forward to taking a little time and reading it, especially as travel season comes up and you can travel for. I mean, Jeff's been doing budget travel for. I mean, Jeff makes no more money than we do, but he travels the world like all the time.
Yeah.
So he's clearly figured something out that you probably haven't. So maybe check it out.
He's figured out a lot of stuff I haven't, but yeah. Well, cool, man. Patrons, stick around. We got one more for you. Everybody else, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah. And so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.